Welcome back, year ones. Here is your second fraction session for this week. For today's session, you might find it helpful to have some rectangular pieces of paper ready cut for you to investigate with, and perhaps some scissors as well. Once you have those things, come back to the video and we can begin. Now today we're going to continue our learning journey about fractions, sharing shapes or amounts of things or objects equally into a number of parts. Yesterday we were looking at halves, sharing things into two equal parts. To warm up our brains, I wonder if you can spot any shapes on this board that show halves. One shape that's been shared equally into two parts. Pause the video and talk about it at home. You may have spotted these shapes which are shared equally into half. The love heart has been shared equally, straight down the middle. Both parts are the same size. We have a square, just like we saw yesterday, shared diagonally down the middle. I can also see the circle has been shared equally, and the triangle and the star. We know any of those ones that have been shared into four equal parts, if I coloured two of them, it would also show half. But today we're going to look more closely at sharing or splitting an object, a shape, into four equal parts. We're going to be identifying shapes that have been shared or split into four equal parts as well. So yesterday, even though there could be more than two parts, there were only two people who wanted to share those things. Today, there's going to be four people. Here's our InFocus for the day. These children would like to share this birthday cake equally into four pieces. That means each person gets the same amount of cake. Now, I can tell you that is a rectangular cake. How many different ways can you find to share a rectangle into four equal pieces? Pause the video to investigate. Now this is one way you might have shared your cake or your rectangle into four pieces. You may have folded it in half down the middle first, straight down the middle, and then you may have folded each half again so that you had four pieces. Yesterday, when we shared something so there were two equal parts, we called them halves. I wonder, do you know what it's called when we share it into four equal parts? Well, if we share it into four equal parts, Hannah gets this piece. This is a quarter. Charles gets this quarter. It's the same size, so it has the same name. Hannah gets a quarter. Charles gets a quarter. How much does Amira get? She also gets a quarter, and Elliot gets a quarter as well. Each child receives 1/4 of the cake. Altogether, 4 quarters make 1 whole. We can also call a quarter a fourth because there are 4 equal parts altogether and we're looking at one of them. These are some other ways you could have shared that cake equally. Instead of folding or cutting the cake vertically, we could have done the same thing horizontally, down the middle and then down the middle again of each piece. We might have cut the cake down the middle the first time and then shared each half in half again. When we're finding quarters, we are usually sharing something in half and then halving each of those pieces again. So there's a half of my first half and another half of my second half. Or we might have cut the cake in half down the middle and then shared each half differently. You can see they cut the first half vertically to create rectangular pieces, but they cut the second half diagonally to make triangular pieces. Although those shapes are different, I can tell you they are exactly the same size, and I know they're the same size because I can see the first half that was created, and then those two parts were shared in half equally again. And a bit like when we were learning about the square, do you remember we could cut the square down the middle or diagonally and it was still showing half even though they were different? On this one, they shared it down the middle once to make two halves that looked exactly the same, and then they cut those in half differently. Sometimes we can use squared paper in maths to prove to you that if I were to cut the cake like this, every child would have the same number of little squares inside. This could be something you could investigate at home if you're still finding that tricky to believe. Now this rectangle has already been cut into lots of pieces. Now I want to show a quarter of this rectangle. To do that, I have to think carefully about how many little pieces there are altogether and how I might share this between 4 people. Let's count how many parts there are altogether. We'll count in twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. There are 12 smaller pieces altogether. Now I want to share this between 4. So I have to think, what is 12 divided by 4? How many 4s are in 12? So I might count in 4s until I get to 12 and see how many groups I've counted, and that will tell me how many of my squares I need to colour. I'm going to count in 4s. Can you tell me how many times I count in 4s to get to 12? 4, 8, 12. I counted 3 times, so I could just colour in 3 squares. That means I have now showed a quarter. You might have just been able to show or see a quarter. Perhaps when you looked at the shape straight away, the first thing you saw was, well, I know that this would be half if I cut it down the middle, and I know I need to then cut it in half again, so I can see there are 4 quarters in my whole. There are many different ways to do this. One way might be that you'd like to make your shape, cut it into the smaller parts and share it between the correct number of people. For your guided practice, have a little look at these shapes and see if you can identify which ones show quarters. Remember, quarters have 4 parts, but those 4 parts are equal. Can you see a shape that has 4 equal parts with one of the parts coloured in? Pause the video and talk about it at home. You might have noticed that this triangle does not have 4 equal parts, it has 2. It must be showing halves. This one here, the shape has been shared down the middle. I'll draw that in. And then each part was shared in half again. We can see there's 4 parts. They all look equal, so this must be showing quarters. Again, this shape was shared in half, and then each half has been shared equally in half again. We can see all of those pieces look about the same size. That must also show a quarter. One of the pieces is coloured in. There are 4 pieces altogether. This one we can see also shows quarters. 4 equal parts, one of them is shaded in. When I look at this one, I can see they've shared that shape down the middle. Then they shared both of those halves in half again. So I now have 4 equal parts. I must have a quarter. Do I have a quarter here? There's 4 equal parts, are there? No, you're right, there's not 4 equal parts. There are 4 parts, but one of them, or 2 of them, sorry, either side are the same size and the 2 in the middle are, but all 4 of them are not identical. So although this one is shared into 4 parts, they are not all equal, so it cannot be showing a quarter. It says, remember, quarters means 4 equal parts, or we're sharing something between 4 people or 4 groups. Okay, so when we look at a shape, we might be showing 4 parts that are equal, but if that shape's been cut into lots of parts and lots of pieces, we are sharing that number between 4. So now it's time for your worksheets. Just like yesterday, can you tick all of the shapes that show quarters? You know there have to be 4 parts all together, and at least one of those parts needs to be coloured in. Then can you show a quarter of the square? You might want to cut out a square that looks like this with the same number of squares inside it and share it between 4. Or perhaps, like we did earlier, you can just see how to share that square into quarters and colour the correct number of little squares. Then can you share your rectangles, the triangle and the circle? I'll give you a tip. You are not just colouring 4 boxes on every picture. Although quarters are to do with the number 4, it's all about sharing what you have between 4. Okay? Like I said, you might want to recreate this shape, cut out each part and share the 4 pieces between 4 people to see how many each person gets. That will tell you how many to colour in. When you've done today's worksheet, again on the home learning page, you can go and look at some of those extension activities. So here, Alex and Jack are reasoning about quarters. You can look at what they're saying and see who you agree with and explain why. You can use the squares to show different fractions. So it says, can you show less than a quarter coloured in, exactly a quarter coloured in, and more than a quarter coloured in? And then here's one for you. If 1 cube means a quarter, what would the whole look like? Well, if we know there are 4 quarters in a whole, how many of those cubes would we need? Then, what would it be if 2 cubes were a quarter? Or 3 cubes? How many different possibilities can you find? You can look at those in more detail on the home learning page. And then don't forget, you can send any of your home learning in to us at the Key Stage 1 email address. Now, this is going to be the last time you hear from me on our YouTube channel for our learning. But I have to say, I do really hope that you have managed to have a really relaxing, peaceful summer holidays, and we cannot wait to see you again when we come back in September. So until then, keep smiling, have the most fun, and we can't wait to hear all of your wonderful stories when we see you again. Take care and see you soon. Goodbye.